So his message is to his supporters, look at my record, and there's more I want to do. There's still some fight left in me. I want a third term.
Hi, I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. Jay Inslee says he is out of the presidential race and will run for a third term as Washington governor, and Austin Jenkins has been along for the ride to cover it all. Austin Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
So tell us, why did he decide to drop his presidential bid?
You know, he was in this race for about 7 months, and while national pundits seem to be saying that he ran a good race, really starting from scratch and established himself as a credible candidate, the reality was he never got above 1% in polls. And so to qualify for the next debate stage in September, he needed to be at least 2% in 4 Democratic National Committee approved polls. And in addition to that, he needed to get 130,000 unique campaign contributors to his campaign. Now, he met that donor threshold, but he just wasn't going to make it in terms of the polling. What's interesting to me is that I don't think the fact he got out of the race is a surprise. I think it's a little bit surprising he did so soon. I was putting money on maybe a post-Labor Day announcement, but clearly he was looking in the mirror and seeing that this just wasn't going to go anywhere, and wanted to get out and wanted to announce his third term.
Okay, so we'll get to that in a second, but when he got into the race and through his time in it, he was known as the climate candidate. He was really pushing that message. I just wonder, even with him getting out of the race, what might be his impact on the larger race going forward with that sort of climate and environmental focus?
He is certainly taking credit for having elevated that issue among his fellow Democratic candidates for president. He's taking some credit for the fact that a couple of the cable networks are going to have climate change-focused town halls and events coming up this fall. He has said that even after leaving the race, he is going to continue to apply pressure to the Democratic candidates on this issue. So he certainly feels like the last 6 to 7 months was time well spent, and that his effort to shine a light and attention on climate change and combating climate change and putting out, I think it was 200 plus pages of climate change policy, was all worth the effort and will inform the debate going forward. And he's not going to step away now from that debate, even though he's not going to be on the debate stage or no longer a presidential candidate.
Well, let's go back a little bit to his time as governor. He wasn't just perpetually a presidential candidate. Of course, he was the governor of this state for 2 terms. So what is his record over the last 8 years on these sorts of policy fronts, not just the political things, but the environmental and climate change policy initiatives?
And he has been talking about climate change and making that a priority of his, going back to his days in Congress, and certainly while he's been governor. You know, for the first 6 years in office, he had divided control in the legislature. Republicans held the state Senate, and it made it very hard for him to move the ball down the field on climate change related legislation. That changed last year, and really changed most notably this year, when Democrats once again controlled both chambers, had healthy majorities in those chambers, and for the first time, the governor was able to get some of his climate agenda across the finish line. Probably the signature bill that passed this year was a clean energy, clean electricity bill that gets Washington state electricity away from coal and any sort of carbon emitting electricity source by 2045. That said, it's also been true that the governor has changed up his policy priorities over the years. Remember back when he was supporting a price on carbon, a carbon tax, a cap and trade system. And he moved away from those ideas and eventually embraced what he called a scattershot approach, or instead of a silver bullet, he said a golden buckshot approach. Several policies that he thought cumulatively could address this issue. Critics will say it's still not enough, and that Washington still isn't on track to reduce its carbon emissions enough. But it really took until this year for him to have some big wins on that signature issue of his here in the state.
So certainly that's not the only thing that he talks about, not the only thing that Washington gets done in Washington legislature, that is, in Olympia. What are some of the things that he might point to in terms of Washington's accomplishments that are worthy of him running for a third term that he might be pointing to outside of the climate and environmental front, unemployment, economy, those sorts of things?
He's already doing that in his announcement via email to supporters about his run for a third term. And he's talking about what he says is his record of success on issues like voting rights, protecting net neutrality, LGBTQ rights, of course, his environmental legislation. So he is saying that, look, I have a track record to run on as a two-term governor, and he's saying there's more work to be done, and he's talking about continuing to be a voice of opposition against the policies of President Donald Trump. So his message is to his supporters, look at my record, and there's more I want to do. There's still some fight left in me. I want a third term.
Okay, so a third term, of course, is not a foregone conclusion, even though Washington has tended to be more Democratic over the last several election cycles, not a definite for him to be reelected. So who are some of the candidates that might come forward, either on the Democratic side, if there were to be a primary challenge, or on the Republican side? Maybe Dino Rossi's name, people remember from running several times amongst statewide races, came very close in 2004. Has his name been thrown out as a possible Republican challenger, or someone else on the Republican side?
It's been interesting to see, I think on the Democratic side, just by announcing a run for a third term, he Inslee, clears the field. Already Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who is eyeing a run for governor, has made it clear and announced that he will now run for a third term as Attorney General because Inslee is not going to vacate that seat. And it's interesting because there's a whole lot of Democratic office holders all the way down to the state legislature who are looking to move up if Inslee moved out of the way, and now that's not going to happen. You're looking at some of their photos right there. On the Republican side, a couple of Republicans have already announced, I believe the police chief of Republic Washington, State Senator Phil Fortunato. Inslee has certainly given Republicans some ammunition, having been out of the state a lot, having expended taxpayer resources as part of this presidential campaign because he took a security apparatus with him from the Washington State Patrol, something that I've reported on extensively along with Jim Brunner at the Seattle Times. That said, it remains to be seen if the Republican Party can put forward a formidable candidate who can raise the money and run a really competitive campaign. It would certainly seem as though Jay Inslee has an advantage being an incumbent, being in a state that historically elects Democrats. But would we say at this point that he's absolutely bulletproof and has a smooth sailing to a third term? Way too early to know.
Sure, and just by point of historical fact, the last person to be a three-term governor in the state of Washington was, in fact, a Republican, Dan Evans, 1965 through 77, so not unprecedented. So moving along, Austin, on another topic, but still in the legislature, Matt Shay, a Republican from Eastern Washington, represents the Spokane Valley, east of Spokane, not the city of Spokane, in the state legislature. He's drawn a lot of controversy for some of the statements he's made, activities he's been engaged in, some of his really controversial things that he's done, gotten a lot of media coverage lately and in the past several years. He's also the one pushing for a 51st state, the state of liberty, as he calls it, to secede basically from Washington and make Eastern Washington a separate state. You cover the state legislature, so when Matt Shay is there in Olympia, I'm curious what your perception is of how he interacts with others and what he does on a policy front, not necessarily when he's in his home district talking to people who very much agree with him. What's he like in Olympia?
He's very effective at doing an end run around the traditional media and communicating directly with his constituents and his supporters, and he does that via Facebook videos and other methods. He's often in videos holding a microphone, doing interviews with people on issues he cares about up on the top floor of the Capitol. He was certainly front and center at this rally during the legislative session around the 51st state idea. Interestingly, he had a unnamed security guardsman with him during that time. He has said that he has felt threatened, and he, at times at least, travels with security. After that event, he spoke briefly with reporters. That doesn't happen very often, but he engaged. There were TV cameras. I was there with a radio microphone. He answered some questions about this 51st state issue. Historically, when I've talked to him, he has in years past, tried at times to strike a conciliatory tone and even try to build potential political bridges with those on the left around civil liberties issues. I think in more recent years, he's been more marginalized. He's lost his leadership position within the House Republican caucus. And with topics like the 51st state, that's sort of what he's gotten known for. And I will just conclude, Scott, by saying that it is striking down lawyerly style here in Olympia, for the most part. Not when he's speaking at a 51st state rally necessarily. Sometimes he's pretty fiery on the floor, but it does contrast to his stump style speeches when he's back in district, when he's not in session, when he is out speaking to different groups. And oftentimes the rhetoric he's using is very charged and very different than how he comports himself here in the Capitol.
Well, Austin, we thank you so much for all your coverage of the Inslee campaign, the coming gubernatorial campaign, and for the legislative coverage day to day. Thank you so much for joining us, Austin.
Thanks for having me.
You can see all of Austin's coverage on NWPB.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.